Yeah, so can you just take us to the beginning of how you got into writing? You do acting as well and screenwriting, a little bit of directing. So if you can just kind of take us on your journey of how you got here.
Well, it's a long journey because I'm not a young man. I started writing when I was really young. I mean, I wanted to be a writer when I was 10 years old, and once you're a writer, you always want to be a writer. You can't not write. So, um, I've loving books led me to loving film, and one way or the other, you just follow the creative path. And so I have done a little bit of everything. I've published a lot of books, fiction and nonfiction, and I've worked as an actor on The Sopranos and quite a few movies, and just did HBO's The Leftovers. Um, and I directed three feature documentaries for the Nobelity Project, our nonprofit. And Nobelity had a pretty big run when it came out. It's really how we managed to get this big education nonprofit started. So it's just been, you got to open yourself up to what the possibilities are.
And then what's your writing process like when you start writing? Do you have an idea in mind? Do you go from one story to another? What's that like?
Well, the first thing I would tell most writers is that something I learned from Gary P. Nunn, the singer-songwriter in Texas, which is don't listen to music in your car. When you're driving across Texas to your gig a long ways away, Gary P., and I've known him a long time, but he never had like a tape player in his car. He was like, well, I can't write songs if I'm listening to songs. So you have to find yourself a space, whether it's at home or in a coffee shop or when you walk, or where you can listen and hear yourself. But my process changes. I started writing on by hand and on a portable Royal typewriter, and I've owned just about every Apple computer ever ever made, and I've written probably 1,000,000 pages of material on Apples, and I walk a lot now too, just because that's the way I try to stay healthy, and I actually dictate when I walk. I walk like way out in the middle of nowhere where there's nobody around, and I open up an email and hit the little microphone button, and as things come to me, I dictate to myself and email it to myself. Just it's a way to keep the notes. So there's no one method. The method is don't stop. Always be writing.
And then you worked with Willie Nelson on the Tao or Tao of Willie. What was that experience like?
The Tao Willie or the Dow Willie, or Willie says, or I don't know, the toe of Willie, you could call it. It was great. I have known Willie a long time, and I was his opening act at a show, in Austin in the really, really old days, and I've known Willie for 40 years, and I had written a lot of magazine stories about Willie, and I've written a film and television stuff for Willie, so I had a lot of material, and we said, why don't we make a book out of all this material I have and all the great things you've said to me. And he's very much been sort of my spiritual and I think intellectual mentor in a lot of ways. He says the most amazing things, and I was smart enough to write a lot of them down. So when it came time to write the book, it actually was pretty easy. But it's a beautiful book. People are always telling me how much they love it, and they read it all the time.
Was there anything that you couldn't put in the book?
Oh, there's always stuff you could put in the book. I don't know. We distilled it down, I think, to the kind of the heart. I thought we did a pretty good job at distilling it down to the kind of the heart of who Willie really is, and that idea of just take life one day with an open heart and let love lead you along, and it'll all work out.
Yeah. And then your novel that is going to be coming out in the book club, All for Love, is already been purchased.
One of the reasons that I'd launched this book club. So I mean, why would anybody try to write and publish 6 books in a year? But I'm not really writing them in a year. I'm publishing them in a year. So the Nobelity Project, I've been making these films. We've been building schools in Kenya, but I've been writing. Like I said, I have to write. And so the writing was accumulating, but the publishing was not getting it out. And so I wrote All for Love, and I sent it to a few people in New York, and they said this would make an incredible movie. So I sent it to some studios in LA, and sure enough, somebody bought the rights to the novel before it was published and hired me to write the screenplay. So the movie's in development in LA, and we have a screenplay, and we're making really good progress. In the meantime, the book hadn't come out, and I just didn't want to wait. So I wanted to publish that. I had this children's book that I had written, and I wanted to publish that, and I came up with this crazy idea. Well, I'll just publish them all in one year.
And then can you talk about writing a screenplay from your own book. I feel like people don't know a lot about that process. What's different in writing for film?
Well, and there's no rules in screenplays, and they say there are. You have to have the act breaks here, and you got the culmination points here and everything, which is why you get a lot of cookie cutter films. It's also the way that studio executives ensure themselves that it fit all the beats it was supposed to fit. It had all the high points and the low points and the character development. It should have been a good movie. It's hard to know what's going to be a good movie. You need a good script, but you need a great director. You need a good cast. It's really a group effort. And but if you're adapting your own book, the first thing you have to do is you've got let a lot of stuff go. So All for Love, that's a good example. It's a story about a father and his daughter who are lost at sea in a fishing trip on the Sea of Cortez, Mexico. And the mom is looking for them from the air with a pilot who is a mentor for this dad. So it's 2 people in a plane and 2 people on a boat. And their lives are at stake. And a girl that you care about very much, her life is at stake. But in the book, there's a lot more kind of flashbacks and backstory about who these people are and where they came from. In the movie, you can tell much of a story like that with just a thought, with a couple of images. And in a book, you might write a full chapter around some backstory, and in a movie, it may just take one shot that someone thinks back to for 5 seconds. So you've got to let a lot of things go. They always say as a writer, you have to kill your darlings. And a lot of times the things you like the most in your book, when it goes through editing, you realize, well, that's my favorite thing in the book, but it doesn't actually make the book better. And so it's rewriting in any instance. You're still rewriting your story when you write a movie. There is actually one of the books in the book of the Every Other Month Club is called Requiem for a Screenplay. And it's 3 films that went kind of through the studio process in LA they were my stories, but I was hired, sold the stories to somebody in the development in LA and was hired to write these films, and they got close, and for various reasons they didn't get made, which is not unusual. If you want to be a screenwriter, write 15 screenplays and one of them will sell. Don't write one and wonder why it didn't sell. So, but looking back on them, I realized that these stories are they wouldn't necessarily have been better as movies. They're really good reads as they are. And so I decided to write a little bit about the film business in general as the interstitial introductions to these screenplays and publish them. So that you get 3 fast reads as opposed to 1 big long novel.
And then can you talk about starting the Nobelity project and how the book club came about?
Well, the Nobelity project started, I had directed, and some of that goes back to The Sopranos. I had wanted to make this movie based on interviews with Nobel laureates that looked at problems in the world, and it was an expensive film, a lot of travel involved, and I just didn't know how to fund it. And when I was on The Sopranos, the funding sort of popped up, somebody who wanted to invest in the movie. But I think I wasn't much past interviewing Desmond Tutu and Steve Weinberg, 2 really brilliant people, that I realized that, this isn't really a for-profit enterprise. We really need to turn it into a nonprofit that's dedicated to working on these problems we're discussing. So that's how it started. 3 movies later, we have a wine called the Turk wine, which is in magnums only. It's big like I am, and it's made by a winery in California that funds the water projects at our school in Kenya. It's called Turning Wine into Water. And we have a new restaurant partnership that's going to launch this year that's going to fund kitchens and dining halls at the schools we built in Kenya. We've built lots and lots and lots of classrooms and science labs and athletic facilities and some libraries. But we've been very determined the last couple of years to build a library at every school where we work. So I thought, okay, I could do the book club and I could make more money here than I would with a publisher in New York, hopefully, and we can build libraries at schools. So when somebody subscribes and gets 6 books, they'll get a bonus copy of the Tao of Willie, by the way. They'll get 7 books. They'll be funding 7 books that goes into one of those libraries, every subscription. And the people who subscribe at a higher level, they'll fund more books, and we'll be putting thousands and thousands of books in these new libraries.
And then can you talk about the impact that you've seen on the communities when you built these schools, and maybe things that people don't realize over here? I feel like when we talk about, you go to Kenya and build schools, people just kind of wash over it. Yeah. Can you just talk about, what you've seen? What's a story that's impacted you and stayed with you?
Yeah, I think our work is, there's a lot of people do great work in Africa and East Africa, a lot of Texas connections to Kenya, but I think our work is maybe a little more personally involved. But When I first went to this Mweiga Primary was our first school we worked. This was a primary school in the middle of nowhere. It was drought. The kids were undernourished. They're all smaller than their parents, and they're stunted growth. And they were walking, as you hear, miles for water. And all they wanted was for us to help them build a water system. And they partnered with us, so we did it together. And then we started building classrooms, but and a library. One of the first projects was a library. But the school came to me when we were opening the library and said, we really want to have a high school. The kids finish 8th grade and there's no place for them to go to school. And you really think about that. 8th grade, you're done. And there were secondary schools, but they were, the closest was 8 miles, a 16-mile round trip walk. And there really weren't even very many spaces open in it. So we built Mweiga Hope High School. That's what our film Building Hope is about. And so we've seen these kids. I've known a lot of them since they were, 5 years old, and they're now graduated from high school. The ones that were 7 or 8 are now graduating from college. And the top scorers have been on scholarship with us. So kids who were going to go to the 8th grade and then were going to go, drive a motorcycle for a living or something and give people rides on a motorcycle are graduating from college and have careers, and it's been hugely impactful. And that's one of many, many, many schools where we work. So it's about 10,000 kids at any one time that we work with. So there's a pretty good scale. We're a 3-person organization. So.
And then did have any of them expressed interest in writing? Have you seen them tell their own stories?
Some of them, but what's most interesting was when we built that first library, we put a projector and had a DVD player and on a computer in there, and so the kids could come on Saturday and watch movies because they'd never been to a movie before. And when we were shipping a bunch of books over there, I went through my shelves and took a whole bunch of VHS tapes and DVDs of stuff that I thought I wasn't going to watch anymore. But it was stacks of them, and we started showing them some Disney movies and some documentaries and some other stuff, and they just watched what they wanted to. I sent a bunch of, because I used to be a comedian, I sent a bunch of Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin movies over there, and the kids fell in love with Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. So 2 or 3 years ago, I was over there, and there were 3 high school boys who had grown up on those movies, have become comedians, and they are absolutely hilarious, but both spoken word comedy, but in physical comedy. And one of the things they do is one of the kids imitates teachers. They were gutsy. These are high school kids. You imitate the headmaster of the school at your own peril, and we'd have an assembly with. And people just crying, they're laughing so hard. But what really cracked me up was 2 of them got up there, and one of them stood on a chair, and they imitated in this hilarious voices me and my wife. And she's 5 foot tall, and I'm 6'7", and they imitated the 2 of us. And I literally was crying. I was laughing so hard. And they've gone off to college now. I think they're still doing comedy.
That's great. And then can you talk about the IndieGoGo campaign, and also your daughter has done some of the artwork for one of the books, or?
Yeah, the IndieGoGo campaign, it's called Turk Pipkin's Book of the Every Other Month Club. It's a subscription, and basic level's $200. You get the 6 books and the Tao of Willie. Then if you want to come in at a higher level, because I take a lot of photos when I'm in Kenya, which help fund our work. So some of the photos that I've never sold before are really gorgeous. The one everybody's going crazy for is this new photo of a lion, a male father lion, and this little male cub, and the 2 of them just kind of like face to face. It's a beautiful photo. So there's a higher levels as well. And then you subscribe, and the first book comes right away, Moleskin Mystery with the Tao of Willie bonus, and then there are others come every 2 months. One of the books comes out of my work with Bob Schneider, the songwriter. Bob, I was one of the early people who worked with Bob on something called Bob Schneider's Poetry Machine, and I call it a generative poetry. He built the machine. The machine is other writers. Poets, have no one to read their work. Everybody who writes loves to write poetry, so Bob sends you a prompt and to the list of everybody, and then that week, everyone who wants to participate writes a piece of poetry with that phrase in it, send it back to Bob. He compiles them all, and it's amazing. This is the generative aspect of it. It's amazing how different the interpretations of the phrase are, like completely different meanings depending on how you break up a phrase or what it inspires you to write. So this collection is of my pieces only. It's called Words for Your Songs. And the second half of it, it's actually, if you flip the book over, it's called Words for Your Long Nights. Oh, I have the mock-up. Look at this. Yes, I do. So Words for Your Songs, and then if you read from the other direction, it's called Words for Your Long Nights. So the black and white illustrations from Moth Generator, and the front half of the book, and the inside too, the top of every piece will be another moth. So Moth Generator is a Twitter bot. It's created by my daughter, who's a true genius, Katie Rose Pipkin, and Lauren Smith. There's two of them actually. But Moth Generator, you tweet words and phrases the way Bob sends words and phrases to the poet to this Twitter account, and it draws these incredible moths with tens of thousands of brushstrokes, and they're dependent upon the words in your phrase. So the title of each of my piece of poetry is a new moth that illustrates that poetry. Now, it may not thematically match it, but you never know. It is what it is. But you know, that maybe some of that comes from the fear that people won't like my poetry, but I know they'll like the moths. I like the pieces, but some of them are the kind of pieces you want to read at night, and some of them literally are kind of like songs. I mean, I hope some people who are songwriters will go, oh, I want to put music to that song. It really is words for their songs.
And then is there anything, like a common theme that ties all the books together? That's
a really good question. I think it goes back to the Tao of Willie that ties it in there, because Willie at the end of the book says, every morning I get up and I look, this isn't an exact quote, but I look myself in the mirror, and I look at myself in the mirror and I say, okay, Willie, today let's give love a chance. And, you know, he says, so far that's worked pretty well. And I think love is the common theme, and All for Love, the novel, it clearly is. And A Christmas Song is the sequel to my Christmas book, When Angels Sing, and it's clearly a Christmas book about love, about repaying love in that case. And even in the poetry, I think that love is really the theme, but interpreted in all completely different ways. So I guess it's generative writing.
And then can you tell people when the campaign's going to start and how long they have to do?
The campaign is fired up and ready to go. It opens on IndieGoGo on November 9, and will run till just before Christmas. I'm cutting off the official in time to ship the books to people, the first book to people before Christmas, so they'll have it if they want to give it. It's actually a great gift for if you know somebody who loves books. So you give me their address, and I ship the books directly to them. But there will probably be, it'll probably still be able to subscribe after that, but I've got to get through that first period and see if I have enough books first.
And is there anything else you would like to add on why people should subscribe and support this this project?
Well, I don't know many places that you can, find an author who says you'll love these books, and you'll be putting books in the hands of really beautiful kids who want to love books too. I'll tell you one quick story. The library, the very first library started when I was at Mweiga. I went for a walk outside in this community, just agricultural, nowhere, walking down a road, and I saw 3 girls coming towards me in the distance. I had my camera, my video camera, and as they got closer, the girl was showing me something, and it was a book. And she came up, and I said, what do you have? She says, I have a book. And the other girls were saying, she has a book, she has a book. They were really excited. And I said, let me see it. And she showed it to me. Well, it wasn't a book. It was a little, probably a signature. There was about a 15, 16-page piece torn from a book. And it was nearly demolished from over reading. But she really had a piece of a book, but it was a printed part of a story. And so I said, can you read for me? So I turned on my camera, and I'm looking through the viewfinder at her, and she starts reading, and she just had this beautiful look. She's reading this story, reading really well in English, and even though she speaks 2 other languages, and maybe 10 years old. She's reading this book, and then she got to the bottom of the page. I said, keep going. So she turned the page, and she's reading, and I looked in the viewfinder, she was looking right at me. And she was just reading along like this, and she was telling the story, and it was so beautiful. And I looked down, and she hadn't looked at the page yet. I realized that she had memorized the whole 16 pages of this book. She'd read it so many times, and that was the aha moment when I went, we got to get these kids some books.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks.